tell you more.
Who do you think knows more, him or me?
Hi Lumineers, welcome to the Lighter Side Show. I'm your host, Jamie Butler, the Everyday Medium. Lumineers, if you haven't seen the first episode with Dan Drasin, applying real science to the paranormal, go there first and then come back here. Because now we're getting into the spoiler alert mode. That's all I have to say. I'm stopping there. And I'm handing everything over to you because I want to know anything and everything. What have you come across, seen, experienced? Maybe something that you really can't explain that you've been experiencing while being the producer, director of Calling Earth.
Wow.
I know. I left it really broad. You had something on your mind during our first episode, and I squashed it. And
yeah, that's quite all right. No, I could actually, apart from the film, I should maybe recount a few personal experiences that I've had.
I would
over
love
the years. I've had objects appear and disappear. I had years ago. I was involved. Did you ever see the film The Mothman Prophecies?
I saw some of it and I didn't finish it.
Okay, it was a fictionalized version of an actual situation that took place back in the 1960s in West Virginia, where strange creatures were seen, UFOs were seen for a period of time, and all those phenomena culminated in an unfortunate collapse of a bridge across the Ohio River. This is in December of '67. And I was, a friend of mine, John Keel, who wrote the book, The Mothman Prophecies, about this whole story. He invited me to come out to West Virginia with him and help him research this case. So I spent some time out there with him. And where to begin? There's so many interesting things that happened there. I actually walked across that bridge a week before it collapsed. This is in Christmas season of '67. And John and I had been told by a psychic in the town that there would be a disaster on the river the night that President Johnson lights the White House Christmas tree. And indeed, that is what happened. That bridge collapsed into the river. This is during Christmas rush hour traffic. It was a huge tragedy. There was no one in the town who didn't know someone who was killed in that. Anyway, John and I were back in New York that day, and we met that evening to watch the White House Christmas tree ceremony on TV, see if anything would happen. So we met at John's house, turned on the TV, watched the ceremony. Okay, nothing happened. Another person with us was a guy named Joe, who was an old Army buddy of John's, who turned up that day sort of out of nowhere. John hadn't seen him in ages. So Joe was there. I met him, shook hands, big guy with a strong handshake. The two of them went out to dinner. I went home, turned on the TV, and the minute I turned on the TV, we saw the news report from West Virginia that this bridge had collapsed. Some years later, 2-3 years later, my friend John ran into Joe's wife in a department store in New York. And John said to Joe's wife, "How's Joe doing?" She said, "Oh, you didn't know Joe passed away." He said, "Oh, God, I saw him 2 years ago." So I said, "Sorry, John, Joe's been dead for 5 years."
What?
He said, Don't mess with me, John. Joe's been dead for 5 years. John said, I saw him 2 years ago. My friend Dan saw him. I swear the guy was there. He was totally solid." I said, big handshake. Big guy with a mustache. So that was my first experience with a materialization of that sort. I'd read about them, but I swear the guy was as real as any of us here now. So.
And the two knew each other.
Yes,
long time.
Yeah, they were old buddies.
So it's not like you could misidentify someone. Like there's no.
No, and after that evening, John couldn't find Joe for a while, and that's why when he ran into Joe's wife, he asked how's Joe doing. So anyway, that's one little thing.
Oh, I love where we're beginning. Oh, damn. Okay.
So another personal experience. This is back in the 80s when I lived over across the bay in Oakland. I had a small apartment there, and one morning I woke up and found that draped over the back of my office chair was a red Tibetan neck cord. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a thing that
Yes.
Tibetan lamas wear around their necks. It was neatly draped over the chair. And so I looked at it and I said, I had actually worn one at one time when I had been a student of some Tibetan teachers, but that had been years before, and I had to cut it off because the knot wouldn't undo. So here's this neck cord with an intact knot that looked kind of old, and I couldn't undo it. So where did this cord come from, and how did it get off the head that it had been of the wearer? Go figure.
Did you find out, and was anybody in your house? There's
nobody in my house.
No other explanation? You weren't in like the community of...
No.
What did you do with it?
I still have it. I saved it. I should have brought it today.
Any notion of who gifted it to you?
No notion. It might have been an artifact from a past life, for all I know. I have no idea. Oh, going back to the West Virginia adventure. One day we'd made 3 trips there. After returning from one of the trips, I have a bad habit of writing silly songs and poems about people and things, and so I sat down and I wrote a silly song about West Virginia and the Mothman and this. And I had a big old tape recorder on my dresser at home, and I put a tiny 3-inch reel of tape on the machine, and I got my guitar and recorded the silly song, and took the tape off the machine, put it down next to it, went to bed. Next morning, the tape was gone. I looked, maybe it fell off the tape. No, couldn't find it. I said, well, when I move out of here, I'll find it. So I never found it.
They didn't like it.
So I figure someday I'm going to be driving along some lonely country road, and some UFO will come down, and a little guy will get out of it with this tape in his hand and say, hey, did you lose this?
Or serenade you with the song.
With the song.
They've been playing it for centuries now and love it.
So I can't explain that one either. But this demonstrated to me that our physical reality is only part of the picture, and maybe a very small part of the picture. It seems like the big thing or the whole thing to us, but it ain't, for sure. Other things had occurred personally with me. My former partner, Jane, who died about 10 years ago, she had herself been very interested in all of these things, and we studied a lot of them together. After she passed, she communicated in various ways. One night I was thinking about her very intensely and sweetly, and went to bed thinking about her. All of a sudden, the clock radio on the night table next to the bed turns itself on. The clock glows like the sun, lights the whole room up, and 3 seconds later it shuts itself off. And so I go like that. It happens 2 more times in the next few minutes, and then that was it. So that was one of a number of things that happened with Jane. Also, I have a habit of every night before I go to bed, the last thing I do is I clean up the kitchen and do the dishes. It's like a ritual for me. And that was the time of the day when Jane would come through as a presence, and I would feel this tingling on the right, always the right side of my head, and it was like really strong. It was like the top of my head was going to come off. It was amazing, and I knew that this was her trying to get through in some way. And one evening, this is about 3 years after she passed, in the kitchen doing the dishes one night, and it's as if suddenly it's as if she's standing next to me. And it was the most interesting experience because I couldn't see her with my physical eyes, but it was like it's like I could feel body heat. I could even smell her and feel her presence. Couldn't see her with my eyes, and I thought, "Wow, this is really interesting." Again, like that, and then 30 seconds later, gone. Well, that was the last communication I ever had from her directly. The next day, I'm speaking with a friend of mine on the phone who's a really quite a talented psychic, and he had been tracking Jane in the afterlife. And he said, I didn't mention this experience to him, and he said, Dan, I have a feeling like Jane's just sort of left for a higher level. And then I told him about this, and I thought, well, it feels like she came to say goodbye. And I was really touched by that.
Wow.
And since then, there has been no direct communication except in dreams, occasionally. And also through a couple of mediums, one of whom is in Poland. I was contacted by a fellow in Warsaw he asked me, do you have a Polish subtitled version of your film? I said, no, I don't happen to have one. I said, would you like to do the translation? So we did that. I sent him a transcript. He did translations to English. We went back and forth with this for a while. And then I created the subtitled version. It took us almost a year to do this, but it was great fun. And I love languages, so this was a new language I was getting familiar with. And so now there's a Polish subtitled version online as well. Anyway, this Polish fellow, Robert, has a friend who's a wonderful medium who does ITC as well as various kinds of mediumship.
And explain ITC one more time.
Instrumental transcommunication, where electronics are used to bring in messages from the other side. And this Polish medium, Marek, has been in touch with Jane. And all I did was, all he wants to know is date of death and a photograph. That's all the information he had. And what he came through with was it was Jane, for sure. And you were speaking of animals before. According to this medium, Jane is in an environment, or perceives herself to be in an environment which is like a small rural community with animals, with horses, and so on. And he says she's doing a lot of learning and a lot of writing, and that would be her. She's a wonderful, amazing writer, and so I'm kind of looking forward to visiting her in some way, shape, or form at some point in the future and see how she's doing. She also, my current partner, Jolynn, had known Jane, and she had at that time been commuting to work. And one day she came home in tears, and I said, "What's wrong?" She said, Jolynn's mom had been given a terminal diagnosis shortly before that. And so Jolynn's driving to work, and she says, "Suddenly Jane appeared in my passenger seat." And my first thought was, my purse is on the seat, isn't she uncomfortable? And so she was taken aback, and she says, and Jane turned to me and said, "I will help your mother through her transition."
Oh.
And this is another, again, she didn't see Jane with her physical eyes, but she sensed that she was there. So, and from what my psychic friend had reported, Jane was doing a lot of this helping people pass over for a while, and then she moved on to other things.
It's like being a midwife in the afterlife.
Yeah, and people apparently do this.
Yes.
They're called to that service, and midwife is a really good, an anti-midwife, you might say,
Yes.
a counter midwife. So I'm fascinated with the question of what are these afterlife worlds like, particularly those that we're told are more or less Earth-like. They're not rigidly physical in the way that this one is. Mm-mm. Although some are perceived that way, I get the sense that some of them are like psychic modeling clay, where the individually and collectively we can form and create and modify the environment, and yet it has a coherency to it that we can live and move in some kind of predictable way. And in other realms which are purely private projections, and others that are apparently full-blown civilizations that we would recognize as such, it's mind-boggling.
It is.
Now, when you are channeling, do you ever get, because you're out of the way, but do you get a sense of that? And how can you...
I only got the opportunity one time. And in my understanding, the way I managed that opportunity when I came back was not healthy and not good. And I have not been allowed to go since.
Wow.
Because when I returned, I maybe lost a marble or two in the experience of not wanting to be human. Nothing mattered anymore. Why did I like these books? I don't need these books anymore. Why do I have furniture? Why do I have more than one pair of underwear? None of that made sense to me. It was just an abundant amount of nonsense, and I wanted to clear everything away, everything out of my life. I didn't want to come back from it. It was a community. It was a space, an actual space. It wasn't like a fluffy cloud of whiteness and nothingness. There were people and animals and building structures and tree-like agricultural. It's similar, but it's not the same. It was not the same. I can't use the same words to describe it. Not even the same words to describe the color. It's as if the color has life to it in and of itself. And I know that's not going to make sense.
Well, you're echoing what many near-death experiencers have reported. And
amazing.
That I think the most amazing thing is the ability to shift back and forth between the perspective of everything matters and nothing matters.
Yes.
And to sense that they are both part of the whole of reality. And there's the stuff that matters, the duality, the business, the time, the space, and then there's... Yes.
Where is that word? Where's the language?
It's certainly beyond language. We can have fun with the metaphors, but it's like, how do you describe the taste of strawberries or chocolate? You can't do it justice.
It's an experience. And I'm happy. I've often begged to go back. I've cried many nights that I wasn't there, but I'm content. It's okay now. As I say, it still has a sad tone in my voice if you hear it, but I know that's where I'll be when this story is over. So I know I'm headed there. Either way, I can't mess this one up.
And we've got all the time in the world, as it were. Right?
There you go. So I'm just going to enjoy this one.
Right. Well, I feel we've gotten, we could go on for hours, but I feel we've gotten a little far afield of the film.
Yes.
The documentary Calling Earth, which took about 15 years to make. 5 of those years I worked with co-producer Tim Coleman. We traveled around. I think I may have mentioned this in the previous segment. We traveled around the States, England, Scotland, and Spain, shot 100 hours of footage, and several films came out of this. Calling Earth is one of them. Tim's film called The Afterlife Investigations came out of that as well. And that film is about the skull experiment. I have a short sequence about that experiment in my film as well, so you can see it there. So anyway, back to some of the really interesting people in the documentary in Calling Earth. One is an older Italian fellow by the name of Marcello Bacci. He's been, since about 1974, he has been receiving voices from the other side through an old radio, big old vacuum tube radio.
Yes.
Sort of vintage 1940s radio. And he has a center in the town of Grosseto in Italy where he lives. And people come, sit around, and listen to him operate this radio and hear the voices of their deceased relatives and children and so on come through his radio. And he's been doing this for years and years. Italian Swiss Television did a documentary about him, and you can see parts of that documentary in my film. And it's quite amazing how we don't know how this works. It's not fake. That's been checked out. People have come and removed the tubes from the radio, and the voices still come through.
What?
So we know it's not the electronics that's picking them up. The voices are coming apparently just out of the loudspeaker, or maybe from in front of the loudspeaker. We don't know. But the bottom line is that these are voices that individuals recognize as those of their deceased relatives and children and so on. And he's in my film. Probably the most interesting and spectacular phenomena that and this is the one that I personally witnessed and personally tested. This young fellow by the name of Robert Vandenbroek, who lives in a small Dutch town about 45 minutes south of Amsterdam, out in the country. He's in his mid-30s now. Since his childhood, all kinds of interesting phenomena have been going on around him. Won't even get into the whole extent of it. But one of the things he can do is you can hand him your camera. He'll point it at the wall, knock off a few shots, look at the pictures, and there will be images of deceased people.
And I like how you just suggested it was like an iPhone or a smartphone. You liked a little swipe. So digital phone, regular
I didn't use a phone.
Camera.
People have done it just with all kinds of cameras, even film cameras going back some years. But I brought my own digital camera, my own cards, memory cards that I had numbered.
He's never touched them.
He's never touched them before. I kept the camera and the cards under observation at all times. I erased the cards in view of my video camera, handed him the camera. He would knock off a number of shots, and then we'd look at the images, and we got a total of 4 interesting images that could not be explained. Two of them were apparently images of Friedrich Jürgensen, who was an EVP pioneer back in the 50s and 60s. Who Robert then, afterwards, this is not in the film, but he channeled Jürgensen, saying, "I'm here and I'm willing to help with all this ITC work." So this is a complicated story. I'm just hitting the high points here. But you'll see the photos in the film.
You do. You see everything that Dan is saying. You document it so well.
Thank you.
Where the viewer, I had no question about the authentic product. Should we call it a product or phenomena coming out of it?
Well, this is also the same experiment was then used by a friend of Robert's who's a photographer. And you'll see some of this in the film as well, where he did a similar experiment with Robert. And what resulted was an image of Neil Armstrong, the astronaut. And this instance was an instance of what I call borrowed photographs. Some of these images are unique, and you can see that they're almost like works of art. They're not hard-edged and literal, but they're very clearly images of a person, a particular person. Some of these photos in Robert's images are based on actual photos that exist somewhere in the world, but they're modified, they're enhanced in ways that he's certainly not capable of doing, least of all in a few seconds while under observation. In this case, this image of Neil Armstrong that showed up was it was quite realistic, and I thought, well, maybe this is a borrowed image. So I went to Google image search, and I searched and searched and searched for an image of Neil Armstrong that matched what Robert had brought through in his camera. I found an obscure New Zealand television interview from years ago, and I went through it frame by frame, and I found a couple of frames that almost perfectly matched this image that Robert came up with in a few seconds. You'll see this all in my film. And then I show the differences between the original and Robert's image, which has, you can see that Armstrong's ear is transparent, and you can see his glasses through the ear. That's sort of, it's kind of ephemeral quality to it. So it's not that he literally took this image and photoshopped it and got it into a camera. A number of his images are based on actual photographs from somewhere in the world. But they have these very intriguing differences, which you'll see some of in my film. How this happens, we don't have words for it. We don't understand it.
What is happening to you as you're seeing it and knowing there's zero time, for him to collect the image, to do you know what I'm saying? Like, do you just want to kind of drop what's in your hands and walk away and breathe? Do you go, oh my gosh, now I have 800 questions for you about the world beyond and everlife and everything? What happens?
Well, I think this is tremendous fun.
He's being
over
so
the
cool
years,
about it.
It's true. It's true. Over the years, at first, how does this happen? Is it really happening? First of all, let me check out. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some other explanation, and I still do that because I think it's important to rule out sort of prosaic causes for things, especially in photographs. People see orbs and so on, and things in digital photographs. 95% of them are known phenomena that occur with photography.
Like bugs. Like bugs.
Bugs, lens flares. Yes, bugs, lens flares.
And learned a little bit.
And also the configuration of modern digital cameras that have their flash right next to the lens.
Oh, yes.
And the lens has very great depth of field. So any microscopic dust particle within inches of the lens is just in focus enough and illuminated 1,000 times brightly by the flash, and it shows up as an orb, and people think, oh, there's a spirit in the photo. It's a piece of dust. And there are genuinely anomalous orb photos that I've seen, that I've gotten myself, that other people have gotten, and it's kind of a long story how to separate one from the other. But to me, this is an example of how you have to be careful and skeptical in the proper sort of way to rule out what's not really there, so that you can isolate the real evidence for what's interesting and genuinely so-called paranormal.
Do you do that for other people or projects or companies?
People, I don't do it as a business, but people will send me emails with photos in them and ask for my opinion on them. I do photo analysis for people like Whitley Strieber and Linda Moulton Howe. I don't know if you know these folks. They're down some really interesting rabbit holes. And they send me a lot of videos. And there's so much fakery now. I mean, on YouTube and so on. Manipulation software has gotten very sophisticated. But there are certain clues that fakes leave behind that you can usually nail. And we can talk about that another time. But
I'd like to talk about that another time. Thank you.
Well, I'll give you one very simple hint. In any photograph in which shadows are cast, look carefully at the shadows to see if they make sense in terms of where the light's coming from. If one object is casting a shadow in this direction and another is casting it in that direction, when there's only one sun up there, right? That's a clue, right? Shadows cast on, say, grass and weeds and bushes are very complex and almost impossible to fake. So look there. See if it looks like just a blob of gray that someone has added to the photo, or whether it's the shadow is really detailed and cast in those branches and leaves in a natural way. So that's just one little easy way to spot some fakes.
Wow. So lastly, before we have
Yes.
to wrap up Lumineers, I would love to know, what's your most memorable experience with ITC?
Wow.
That's a big
I
broad
haven't
question.
I haven't practiced it myself. I've been more of a journalist in that area. But I think the most interesting and mysterious communications of that type that I've seen, besides Robert's photographs, would be Konstantin Raudova's extended audible communications, which you'll see some of in the film. He's been able to sustain these communications for a matter of many minutes, which is really unusual. He also he has a particularly strong personality that comes through, and I think that's part of the energy that he brings to bear on this. Also, he spoke 6 languages. He comes through in German and English and a few other languages. So the guy was awesome. He hasn't. I don't know that he's come through in recent years. One guy in Australia picked him up on a tape recorder, maybe 5-10 years ago. I think he's just hanging out, waiting for this movement to revive some more, and for more people to start doing it. We'll see.
I got an idea. Let's start practicing.
Yeah. Can't hurt.
It can't hurt.
It doesn't cost much. And it doesn't matter really, if you're trying to get voices from the other side, it doesn't really matter what technology you're using, as long as it can record sound. In fact, cheap recorders turn out to be better than professional recorders.
So even tape or digital? It's fine?
You can still buy cassette tape recorders online. They're very simple, and they work as good as anything.
This is
So
great.
people record just on their straight on their computers. Vicky Talbot, who you will see in the film, is a wonderful person who's become a friend of ours, lives up in Washington State. And she is, after some years, still in touch with her son, who passed in 2001 in a kayaking accident, along with his friend Jim. And both of them come through still with their friends from the other side. Vicky has been experimenting with different techniques of EVP. There's a traditional technique where you just start the recorder going on the table. There are other techniques where you provide background sound of some kind that it's thought they can use to modulate into voices. There's various techniques. It almost doesn't matter what technique you use, as long as you have a bond with the person on the other side, and do it regularly and practice it regularly.
That is important.
And it's easy to get discouraged if it doesn't happen right away. So it takes some commitment and a real desire to push this thing forward and develop your own style and your own way of doing it. And in some cases people get no results at all. It may be that their loved one has passed on to an area that's relatively inaccessible. In other cases, they'll come through right away. There's a certain amount of involuntary mediumship that goes on when people have experiences after someone has passed, and they suddenly hear voices in their heads, and phenomena start occurring around them. And I think those people, as long as they don't get freaked out, I think those people are privileged because they don't have to go through the long period of patience and developing the technique. So all kinds of things happen, and I think the more the merrier.
I agree. The more the merrier.
Yeah.
So Lumineers, that means you have a little bit of homework now, right? Some EVP practice, get a digital recorder. We'd love to hear what's going on. And if you need some tips or guidance, please check out Dan Drasin YouTube.
Vimeo.
Oh, you're just on the Vimeo.
Yes. Yeah. High class.
Check out Dan Drasin on Vimeo. You also have a website, but we have all the links beneath. So please, Lumineers, I'd like to remind you, If you are attracted to something, if you've been pulled to it, if your ears pinged and your heart went, what? Follow through with it. See what it's presenting for you. Remember, you're in control of your journey, so follow what you are being, I guess, pulled to see or experience. That's about it. And I want to tell you something else. Thank you for being here. Thank you for lending me your ears and your eyes and for being present today. I am so grateful for you. And
Thank you, Jamie.
this guy, thank you so much for being here and just giving us your time and your day and chilling out with us. It has meant so much to me,
It's a
honestly.
pleasure. Genuine pleasure.
Oh, I love it.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to do this again. We're going to.
We'll do it.
If that's okay with you.
That's very okay.
I'm being
with me.
aggressive now. Dan. All right, Lumineers, take care. I'll see you next time. And remember, it's not woo-woo.
It's true.
Bye.
The lighter side with Jamie. The lighter side with Jamie. The lighter side.